Okay. So React is more, I would say, is more like a Lego, right? Where there are cubes available, right? And there are things available. So useState is one of the things that is already available in React, which allows you to build stuff, right? So you don't have to build everything, so you just have to memorize some of the functionality, but you have to use the JavaScript syntax to do that, right? So that really helps. So first to define useState, which allow you to build a state, then you define your state. So counter and set counter is your basically set parameter. So a counter is a variable, and then set counter is a function which is automatically available, right? So what useState does, it says, okay, I can give you two things. The first one is going to be the variable, and the second one is going to be the the setter, right? That allows you to set that, and you name it whatever you want, right? So in the next line, if I have a whatever, let's say if I have a whatever as a state, right? Then I would just say set whatever, and then I would say use state, and I can set something like 1 as the default value to begin with, right? So this is the syntax, right? So I can create something and a setter together, and it's up to me what I define. All right. So I've defined a counter. So this is the dynamic part. You see here, this is the static part, which means it's hard coded here. It doesn't change, right? But anything that's gonna be changing, like the state, I have to use curly brackets, right? So if I want to use, let's say, h2 slash h2, another element here, I'm just gonna say counter, and then I would use a curly bracket. And then within that curly bracket, I would actually use the actual counter, right? So this counter is basically this. So if this changes, this changing as well. So we made it dynamic now. So you see there's a 0 here, right? If I change this to 1, this will set to 1, right? Because we changed the default, the initial value. Okay. So we define the state. We define the use state that allows it to build state. We define the state, and then we are using the state inside our code, right? Um, okay. So next thing we want to do is we want to change this. Okay. In order to change it, we need some sort of mechanism to change it, right? In HTML, there are multiple ways to do it. One is a button, right? So if I create a button, I can do that. So in HTML, we have a button, and then similar, how you create an HTML tag, you have an open button, open uh, uh, button and close button tag, right? And then you can, whatever you put in between gives you the label, right? So I've created this, and this is the default button. We haven't really styled it. We can style it as well, but this is a default look it gives. Right now, if I click on it, nothing happens, right? Uh, but I can change it by I can I can I can say when I click on it, I want the counter to be changing. So that's what I want to do, right? So how do I achieve that? I can achieve it by creating an on-click event. So buttons have on-click events, right? And that goes here inside the button body. So if you have ever taken like an HTML class, you would probably know that there is an on-click event, which is the way you define it is you'd say on-click, and then event, you again put a curly brackets, um, and then you need to create this event, right? Because again, it's a dynamic part, right? It's not just an HTML. So that I'm going to define it here. I'm going to say function, right? I'm going to call it a click handle, or plus handle. Let's call it plus handle. This is like a regular function, right? What a plus handle does. Why did I name it plus handle? Because I need to have a meaningful name so that when I click on it, which is a plus sign, I know what's been called, right? And I can just use that plus handle inside here. So what's happening when I click on it, it on click is going to run this plus handle, right? So if I click on it, it basically runs this function because I've defined it here. I said on click run this. So two things now are in within the curly brackets. One is the counter, which is this guy, and then the second is the plus handle, which is this, right? Okay, so now we already have a counter, which is the value, but it also provides a set counter, right? This allows us to change the value of the counter, right? So all I need to do is counter plus 1. This means take the existing counter and add 1 to it. Okay, so now if I click on it, you see it's changing. So now see, now this is more meaningful, right? You can do a lot of things with a very few syntax, right? It's very meaningful. It says when I click some here, I want this variable to change, and automatically changes it for me. So this is really beautiful, right? So this now is actually a real application that I can build. If I want to build a game or anything, I can use this philosophy of building state and then changing it. Okay. Any questions on this one? And I would suggest, make sure you log in, and then what I would do is I would just save this, and you can actually save it. Just gonna name something. Let's call it counter app or something like that. Okay. So now it has, I have a new, you see, I have a URL, a counter app, right? This means I can now, it remembers this app. So if I take this and then open it in a new tab, it will open this app, right? It's saved in my account. So if you have logged in your account through Code Sandbox, you would have it. Any questions? All right. Cool thing about this is that now that I have a counter, I can just use this counter anywhere, right? Yeah, go ahead. Parenthesis after the, okay, quick question. What are the parentheses for after the plus handle? After the plus handle. Are you talking about this?
Sorry, yeah. It says like function plus handle with like empty parentheses, where we're defining things.
Oh, this one?
Yeah, like right before the curly brackets where we're making like dynamic things. Why is there empty parentheses after plus handle?
Oh, this is, remember in JavaScript we learned about the functions, right?
Uh-huh.
So if you remember, like when we do, let's say if I do CodePen and let's say if I have an add function, then I would say function add, and this was a signature, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I can
Okay.
pass like, number 1 and number 2, right?
Oh, yeah, that's
And
right.
I can do something, right? So in this case, I'm not actually passing anything inside. I'm just, I could, but I'm not passing anything, right? So this is just a normal function. And here it's saying when I click on it, run this function. And all it does, it runs this function, right? Yeah. So as I said, it's all JavaScript, right? Uh, the cool thing about this is it's got so much, it's so cool that once you understand all you need to remember is how to define state, right? How to call it when you click on it. That's all you need to remember. Remember, we learned about the callback functions and all that stuff. It's all built in here, right? So you just have to use it, which is really great. So let me show you some magic, right? So now we have defined a state. If I simply do this, what happens? I would see so many different counters. So I just said, it's the same counter, but when I click plus, you see all of them are changing because it's the same counter. I'm using it uh, over and over again, right? So what happens when I click on it? It runs the plus handle, right? It executes it and it says set the counter, take the existing counter, whatever that is, right? And then add 1 to it and set it. So what happens is set counter is an interesting function. It says, okay, I'm going to change it, and then I'm going to repaint the whole screen. Okay, so it actually repaints everything that is inside here. And when it repaints it, it substitutes the new counter value, which is updated, into this counter. So let's say if the counter right now is 15, if I click on it, what happens? It becomes 16. And then whenever this counter is defined, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 places, it updates all of them to 16, right? And it repaints the screen. See, this is really cool, right? Um, it's very simple and intuitive. This is how you build the application, right? Um, if I were to do the same functionality in like pure JavaScript, I would have to do quite a bit of magic to do that. All right. That's why I prefer React, because you you can build stuff, you can see things as you build, and because ultimately you want to build applications, right? All right. So uh, let's let's take this application, and now I want you to make some changes to this, right? Hopefully you guys have made this change. If you haven't made this changes, make sure that you add it. And instead of hello code sandbox, I'm gonna say counter app. Okay, we build a counter app, and yeah, make sure you change this. And now instead of plus button, I want you to create some minus button. Okay, so replace this plus to a minus, and so when I click on it, it should subtract, not add. So 26 should become 25, and then so initially it will be 0, and then the first time you click minus, it's going to become -1, right? So let's change it. I think with very few changes here, you can do that. Any question before you start? Okay, so let's first make this work, and then once it's working, change it to a negative counter, right? Instead of positive counter. Sure, let me copy paste this code. I'll just copy paste the code in the chat so you can If you haven't done, you can copy paste. Yeah. All right. Let's take 5 minutes to do. I mean, it should be pretty simple. Trial and error, right? Trial and error. Try something, see it, because you have this canvas here, right? Paint, see if it paints it, right? It's pretty cool, right? I can just change here, blah, and it changes here, right? So try something and see if it works, right? And if you want to go back, you can always copy paste this original one that I pasted here and then restart, right? I'll be back with some water. Once you're done, you can just paste your code in a private message so that just copy the whole code and paste it in private message once you're done. In this case, whatever you think is right is usually right, right? It's yeah, and just free to change stuff, right? That's how you learn programming. If you're too careful of breaking things, you're never gonna learn, right? So I'll just say always, see how you break it. This is how a lot of these big applications are built, like Facebook and Instagram, and all of these are built like this using React. And sometimes when you change something, you may discover something new, right? So take some risks, right? Change something. Always remember how to get back to the original. If you know how to do it, you can just break it. All right. So that's pretty good. Looks like you guys understood. So that's good. Okay. So yeah, this is like a piece of cake, right? I mean, it may look complex at first. It's like, but the cool thing about this is, you know, it's you see what you get what you see, right? Kind of functionality. And I always like it in an environment, and it's a visual. You know what you're trying to do. Um, you don't have to console log everything, right? Because you have a visual medium where things are outputted, right? So that's great. So we learned two concepts. One is how to define our state, which is through here, right? And then we learn how to change our state using a handle. Okay. Um, uh, Buttons have many different events. So if you want to learn about a lot of different events, I would just say HTML button events. Okay. They're called DOM events. So you can learn more about it, but uh, there are multiple events. Like for example, here, I can click on something, right? I can hover over it. You see, when I hover over it, it does something, right? There's also double click. So where are the listed events are listed? There should be a list of events. So this is an on click. The only thing is in React, we camel case it, which means C is capital. So there are little differences in React and HTML events, but in a way they are same. Um, on load is when the page is loading, you can do something, but here we're not loading the page, right? Mouse over, right? There's a mouse over event and mouse out event, right? Then there is a mouse on. So if I hold this, see, I'm actually holding it, click and holding it. This one is like mouse overing, like I can hover over it and then it changes. And when I come out, it changes, right? While I'm inside the box, it says thank you. And as soon as I come out, it says mouse over me. So this is called mouse over and mouse out. This is called mouse on mouse down and on mouse up. So here what happens is, you see nothing happens when I go in and out, but if I click on it, it says release me. I'm still holding because you can't see it obviously, right? But if I'm holding it, it says release me, then I would just release it and then it says thank you. Okay. So that's that. There's also double click. Let's look at the double click first. So let's do one thing. If I on click it, it increments by 1. But if I double click it, it increments by 2. Okay. So I'm going to create another handle called function double plus handle. Okay. And in this case, I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to add 2 to it. Okay. And I can add another event to this button. I can have multiple events for the same button. Okay. So another event would be on double click. And when you start typing, you can see all the events that are available. There are tons of them, right? But I'm just gonna do on double click equal to, and same thing. I'm just gonna use this double plus handle, and I'm just gonna format this so that it looks more presentable. Let's hide this as well so that we can see more things. Okay. Okay. So now if I click on it, it becomes 32. But if I double click on it, you see it. So right now it's 44, right? So if I double click on it, let's make it 10 so we can see the difference between click and a double click. Click is 49. Double click, it jumps, right? So double click is like a two continuous click right after one. That instead of just doing +1, it does 10, right? So 1, double, right? I think it does both. It does uh it does plus because they're clicking on it twice, so it does 2, and then it does 10. That's what it's doing, right? So um all right. So um so that's that's that. How about this? If I actually hover over it, and instead of hovering over the button, what if I just hover over the 80s, this number? Okay. Uh, I want to, I want this to go down, right? Number to go down. So in that case, whichever element that we want to, you know, um, the um, let's say if I hover over 87, it should automatically go down, right? So what is 87? 87 is defined here, like this one. This is where the counter and 87 is, right? So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna have, let's have those events here. Uh, let's say mouse. What was that? Mouse. Mouse over, like on mouse over, right? So I'm just gonna write that. So I'm gonna say on mouse over equal to. And it's always equal to curly brackets, and then you have to define a function. In this case, I'm gonna say function minus handle, right? And then this one would be -1, right? On mouse. Yeah, and then just use this handle to put it here, right? And save this. So now, if I just hover over it, you see, boom, it's changing as I hover over it. But only one time. I have to out and then hover in, right? So this is basically, it's when I mouse over, it only does one time, right? As soon as I do mouse over, it changes, right? Let's try that. So as I said, there are tons of events that you can just use, and it's pretty cool. You can click on it, you can hover over something, you can type in something, because sometimes, if you have an input box, you can type it in, right? So there's a change event as well. So yeah, usually you don't want like on click and on double click in the same one. You just want to have, because otherwise it's pretty confusing, right? So it just does 10, right, every time. And I want to reduce it, so I'm just gonna, right? I can reduce it, right? But I have to, you know, keep doing it, right? Any questions? So now you can see the potential, right? The potential is you can pretty much build anything, any application that you want to build using using React. You just have to think about what's going to change and how I'm going to change it. That's it, right? I'm changing this number using an event, a click event, a hover event, a double click event, right? So pretty much that's your mm, um, that's how you build pretty much anything. For example, let's say if you want to build a um, tic-tac-toe, right? So let's just take an example of tic-tac-toe. Um, And this is all CSS, but think about this. So you have, think of these are all of these are like button, right? And what I'm doing is when I hover over it, it shows me what is going to be. Is it going to be X or O, right? So, but it goes away as soon as I move away. Right? So let's say if I'm the player one and I put X here, now I placed it because I clicked on it. Next thing I want to do is now it shows me O, right? Because I already, it's a second player. So let's do O, right? Then X, and then O, and then this. And at that time it calculates because it has a state inside, right? So somehow it's keeping all the things inside, and that's your game pretty much, right? So here, what is a state? Anyone know in this game, what is a state? How do you remember what is this the state is going to be? Anyone? And this project actually is pretty interesting. There is no JavaScript. It's all done through CSS. It's mind-boggling what you can do with CSS as well. CSS is also very powerful. But typically you don't want to build it in CSS. You want to write JavaScript to do it because it's dynamic, right? So anyone can tell me what is the state in this? What state you want to have? First of all, you have 9 buttons, right? So let's just make a list here. So you want to build what? I'm just going to put comments here, right? I need 9 buttons, right? What else do you need here? So there is a click event for each button, right? Yeah. So I have a player 1, right? And you have equal to X, and then you have a player 2 equal to O. That's your state, right? Right? Your X and O is your state. Okay. When you click on it, you also need to save the you need an array of things. So you need an array of, let's say O is 0 and X is 1, for example, right? So you need an empty array of like, let's just put all the null initially, right? Something like this. You have a 9 total, 9 elements of null. So this is empty, right? Let's say if player selects first, which means this, so it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sorry, 8, not 9. 0, so 0 to 8. So let's say player 1 does click here. That means X is, let's say, 1. Then I'm going to make this 1, right? If this becomes O, then, well, if it's the first one is 0, this is 1, something like that, right? You can so this would be my state, like an array is my state, and I'll show you how to update that as well. The winner is also a state. Who's the winner? Right? Initially nobody's winner. Then it can be player 1 or player 2. So you have multiple states. So far we only looked at like one state, just a number, but in this case you have multiple states. Okay, so this is how you want to think about it. And ultimately it's about, once you build it, when you do something, you need to change the state, right? Yeah, also, you want a play button, right? You want a play button. You want a play button and a reset button, right? That's also state. So let's since we're building games, right? Let's have a play button. And so this is where we learn how to change have something showing up and something hiding, right? It's called conditional rendering. So let's learn that topic. So hopefully you have you have saved this. Um, if you haven't, just do that. I'm gonna just paste the whole thing in the chat for you guys, so you can save it. All right, and then I'm gonna create a brand new app, code sandbox. Okay, and then I'm gonna say create and React, and I have a React app. All right, so let's build that. Pretty much every one of you will need this functionality uh, so that you can start the game, uh, pause the game, and reset the game, right? So we need something called status. So let's build a status. So I'm just going to say import use state from React. Again, you always need to import this. And between these two lines, I'm going to define my state. And the way it's going to be const, I'm going to call it status. And set status equal to use state. And you can start by so how do we want to do, like, if it's initial state. So the way, let's define the state, right? So initially you will have initial state. Initial state would be there should be a play button, right? Because you haven't started. Show play button. And this is the state where we haven't started the game, right? Then the next state is going to be, once you click on a play, hides the play button, right? Right? When I click on the play button should hide itself, right? And then um, but pause button shows up, right? Up, right? So so the game is started, but I can pause it, right? At any time. The game is still playing, but the pause button shows up, right? Um, if I click on a pause, what happens? The game pauses, right? Pause button hides, and continue button shows up. Good. Right? So initially there's a play button. If I click on a play button, then play button disappears and a pause button shows, right? Because the game has started. But you can pause it now. We're not going to actually build the game. We're just going to build the button to, um, then if you click on the pause, what shows up, uh, it will say continue, right? Also, we can have an end button as well, right? So pause button shows up, pause button shows up, also end button shows up, right? because once you start playing, I can either pause the game or I can end the game, right? Once you pause it, continue button stays, and also end button also stays, right? Not button stays, right? So you'll see two buttons. One, it will be continue, and end. And then if you click on the end button, click on the continue button. When you click on the continue button, what happens? The pause button shows up again, right? Because I can pause it again. And then end button also shows, right? If I click on the end button, what happens? Pause button hides, and end button hides. Play button shows, right? Because the game has ended. Got it? So in terms of state, let's define a state. Okay. Let's define a state which, our first state would be initial state. Okay. You can actually define as a number as well, which is much easier to compare, but I'm just going to call it initial state, right? But once you play, you have a play state, right? Once you pause, you have a pause state, right? And then once you end, you go back to the initial state, right? So you have three states. You have initial state, you have play state, and you have pause state, right? So this is our initial state, right? This is initial. Okay. Once you click on a play, you're in a play state, right? Once you click on a pause, you're in a pause state. When you click on a continue, you go back to the play state, right? And then once you end it, you go back to the initial state, right? So our use state should be, I'm just going to call it initial, because when you start, we're going to have an initial state. Okay. So I'm just going to define as an initial state. I mean, I can use a number, like I can say initial state is 0, play is 1, and pause is 2, or something like that. But instead, I'm just going to use text so you guys can understand. Okay. And I'm just going to keep this here. So, I mean, this is commented out, so it's not going to impact my thing, right? And I'm just going to also comment it so I know what state that I need to look at it, right? Even though this may look complex, but it's pretty simple. So I'm going to call this hello play game. Let's play game. I'm going to call it let's play game. Okay. Okay. And then I can just simply use the status here, right? But I need to use curly bracket to show the status, right? So I can just say status is status. So right now it shows me the initial status, right? Because this is within the curly bracket. So it's going to substitute this status here, whatever the value is. Right now it's initial. Okay. So my game hasn't started yet, so it's an initial status. I can call it play hasn't started, or whatever I want to call it, but I'm just going to call it initial status, right? And I'm going to create a button here. And then so the button is going to be, it's interesting. If it's an initial state, because button is not depend, well, it depends on the state, but it's a next action. So when I'm in initial state, I want this to be like a play, right? So I want to start the game. So remember, any game, when you start, the first thing you see is a play button, right? So once you click on the play, then the play starts, right? But while it's playing, you don't see the play button. You would see the pause button or end button, right? So here I can say, if my status is not play, then show the play, right? Right. So in the initial, I want to if it's initial, I want to show the play button, right? So that I can say, right? So what I'm going to do is, there's something called conditional rendering. So what is a conditional rendering? Conditional rendering, it says if certain conditions are true or false, I want to show this. Otherwise, I want to hide this. Okay. So here I can say, and it's very simple syntax. So what you need to do is, remember, because it's a dynamic, I always want to use a curly brackets, right? And I want to put everything within the curly bracket because it's dynamic. And here I want to use the status. So I can say if the status equal to initial, right? If the status is equal to initial, then whatever I want to do, I would use something called end-to-end, which means if this is true, then do something, show this, right? And then what am I going to show? I'm just going to show this. So this is a very simple syntax. It's basically saying, if the status is initial, end show this. Okay. So yeah, initial, not initial, right? So the status is initial, which it is, it shows a play button, right? So that satisfies our first thing. Okay. Now, when I click on the play button, what happens when I click on the play button? When I click on a play button, I need to change the status to play, right? That's all I need to do. So I'm going to do the on click magic, right? Equal to curly brackets. Remember, you just have to remember how it works, right? So in a button, you have on click, and then here I have to create a function. And I'm going to call it, let's say, play handle, right? And the play handle would, what it will do, it would just say set status to play, right? And then I'm going to use this play handle inside here. Remember, React is all about, you define a state and you change a state by something. Okay. So now what happens when I click on the play? What's going to happen? It's going to run this play handle, and it's going to change the status to play, which means the status is no longer initial, which means this requirement doesn't satisfy anymore. Here it says, if the status is initial, show this button. But now the status is no longer initial after I click on it. So it in a way, it hides itself. Click on it and voila, it's gone, right? what happens now? Now, in a play state, the state is now play, which is the second state here, right? In this case, the play button hides itself. The pause button and then the end button shows up, right? So I want to do exactly the same thing that I've done here, which means I would write if the status equal to play, then I want two buttons. One is a pause button, right? And I need another button, which is called end button. But in order to do that, there's a little kind of syntax here. What happens when you have two items side by side? You need to wrap it with a parent. And you can just have an empty tag, which is kind of interesting. Okay, and if I format this, it will show itself properly. So here I'm saying if the status is play end, then you would just create a parent, which is an empty tag, and then put those buttons inside. And yeah, just put those two buttons inside. So now I have pause button and end button, right? But in this case, I want to say pause handle, and then this should be end handle, right? So I'm going to create two more functions. Pause handle. And all it does is change the status from play to pause. And then end handle. What it would do is set status to initial, right? Because it changes back to initial because we ended the game, which means you go back to the initial state. Okay. So let's do this. So when I click on a play, pause and end shows up. By end, if I pause, well, we haven't actually built the pause here, so that let's just use end. I click on end, it goes back. Okay, initial state. Play hasn't started yet, right? Play starts, end, play ends, right? Simple. Now, I'm just gonna paste this code for you guys. Now you guys need to build a pause button. So just like we have an initial state, we have a play state, you need to build another state called pause. So what happens when you have a pause? Remember, when you have a pause, you need to have we want to hide the pause button. We want to have two buttons, continue and end button, right? That's what you need. So use this code to build that. I'm just gonna put it here just in case if you, let me just delete this. Okay, so all you want to do is now build pause state, right? What happens when I click on a pause? Which shows continue button and end button, right? Any question? Is this really confusing or is it straightforward? Now we are actually getting the weeds into like the logic, right? Because we figure out how the state works, right? It's pretty simple. You have a state, you set up as initial, and you can change it by clicking a bunch of buttons, right? So, and this allows you to conditionally render stuff. So it says if it's a state is initial, show only this button. If it's play, show only these two buttons, right? So now you need to have a third situation here, which says if the status is pause, show this two buttons. And each, I think end button should do this exactly what it does. End button should, you know, end the game. It just does the same thing as before, right? But the continue button would change the status to play, right? Because you pause it, now you're continuing it. I'll give you 10 more minutes. Any question on this one? Okay, so let's build this. As I said, I put in the chat, you need to build another state called pause state. And the pause state would show two buttons, a continue button and an end button. When you click on a continue, it changes the state to play. If I, and you can just use the same handle here, right? I think there's a play handle. Just use a play handle for continue and then end handle for end, right? That's it. I'll give you 10 minutes and I'll be back. So with this conditional rendering, you get magic power to make things disappear, which is pretty cool. You just have to use a syntax. If something is this, then only show this, which means when that's not true, it automatically disappears, which is pretty cool. Actually, you can build some games around it where things disappear. Um, so status syntax is pretty, uh, you need to draw, I mean, as I said, now we are going into logic, right? It's not about coding, it's about creating your logic, right? So, uh, like think about any game, right? I mean, I made it a little bit complicated, but think of it this way. Uh, if when you play any game, you have an initial state, but you haven't started the game. So that's the initial state, right? And you need to have a play button, right? So so that's what it is. Says when it's initial state, this is basically show me the button, right? So if the state is initial, show this button, play button, right? And then that button does something. So if I click on a play, what happens? The play starts, right? So now I have a play state. So initial state is when you haven't started the game. Play state is when the game is started, right? In that case, you'll have some sort of game going on. Like if it's a tic-tac-toe, you'll have a tic-tac-toe game showing up here and then you can play, right? But at the same time, you should be able to pause it or end the game, right? While you're playing the game. So you need to show two buttons. One is you pause the game, or second button would be end the game because I don't want to play the game anymore, right? So this is simple. You would say, if I'm playing the game, which means the status is play, I want to show two buttons, pause and end, right? But what happens when you pause the game? So you need to do the third state. When you pause the game, you want to have another button called continue play or something like that, right? You can also show play button, doesn't matter. Uh, uh, and then you also want to have an end button, right? Does it make sense? It's in a way it's called state diagram, right? Yeah. I gave you this exercise because when you build this, you will have to deal with something like this, right? Where you have to build your logic around something, and you want to hide and show stuff based on, you know, whatever you're doing. And play button is pretty standard, right? So basically what you want to do is pretty similar to this. Instead, the status should be pause, and then you will have continue and end button, right? That's that's what you want to do. No, yeah, I think it's the same task. So uh, people are still working on it. So those who want to continue working on this one, you can change this. So instead of having an initial state, which doesn't look good, you can do something like if status is initial, you can say something like let's begin the game, right? When the status changes to play, you can say the game is continue playing or something like that, playing the game. And then game, when you pause it, you can say game is paused, things like that, right? You can change that as well. Actually, let's make it a little bit more interesting. Um, okay, I'm just gonna copy the image address here, and then um, let's do this. Where's that? Oh, not this one. This one, right? Yeah. Um, Here. So this can be also based on the state, right? So I can say if the status is equal to play, which means game is playing, then when I show some image, right? And the source, and this is all HTML stuff, right? Um, I don't know, this not, copy image address, not the image itself. What? I don't know why is it doing this. Oh yeah, look at that. When the game is playing, it shows something like this, right? I can end it, right? I can play, the game is playing, I can end it, right? Um, which is pretty cool, right? I just simulated that this, put just image, which means the game is being played, right? So, which is pretty cool. And I also can I can use my CSS skills, right? So that when I use this image, which is too long, I'm trying to figure out how do I copy the link address? Copy the link address. No, I don't want the link. I want the image address. Yeah, it used to give like a link. I don't know why it's not giving, but anyway, that's not a big deal. What I want to do now is because these buttons are now, like here, I want them to be here, right? So for that, I can use a flex, right? So what I have to do is I would create a parent. Remember, we were using I can use a div, class name equal to, let's call it parent. You can call whatever you want. And then here, like this, right? And then I can say, parent is a flex, right? So I can go here and just say CSS parent is display flex, right? And obviously it shows kind of like this, right? Which is not the ideal situation. But now I want these two buttons to be down here, right? So what I'll do is let me format this. Yeah, the image is too big. You know what? I'm just going to remove this. Let me just keep it for now. What I'm going to do is I can create another parent here. So this one I want to be flex direction. Flex direction. I want this to be column, right? So it looks like this, right? And then inside I can create another parent, and then I can put those buttons inside here as well. So I can do that as well, right? But anyway, let me find another source here. Maybe this is probably not the best idea. Save image address. I don't know why. Oh yeah, this is better. This is the address I want, not this long text. This is what I want. Okay. Yeah. So you can do something like this, right? All right. So you guys got the pause? You guys still working on pause? Let me know. Or any question on pause? Okay. All right. I'm gonna give you a solution for pause. Unless you're working on it, let me know. If you're working on it, let me know. Then I can wait because I don't want you to. Oh, okay. All right. So for pause, all I need to do is this. I would say I can literally copy this, right? And I can say if the status is pause, I'm gonna have this button, the first button to continue, and the second button to end. And when I do continue, I want the play handle, right? Because when you continue, you're gonna continue with the play, right? So if I format this, I get, let's start. When I start, it's in initial state, I can play, and then I have this, you know, plays going on, like I'm playing the game. And then suddenly I gotta take a break. So I'm just gonna say, okay, let's just pause this game, right? So it pauses this game. And then I can say, okay, let's just continue. All right. So I'm continuing the game. So the game is still going on. Then I can say, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm just gonna end the game, right? So that's how it works, right? So I can play back again, right? So play is this, pause is this. Let's find an image for pause. So um, let's say pause game image, and I'm gonna paused, right? I'm gonna get this image address. Let's see if it's an address. Oh, that's a problem. I need to go here and then copy the image address. Otherwise, it gives me that base 64. Okay, so this is the. So here, what I'm gonna say is, um, if status is paused, it's supposed to be paused, not paused. But anyway, then show this image. The source is basically this. Right? So start this game. So play, plays, pause the game, continue, play the game, right? And let's find the initial as well. So we're gonna call it start game. Let's use this one. This looks pretty cool. Okay, and then I'm gonna have another one. See, I'm writing all the discretely, right? If this happens, show this. If this happens, show this, right? And you can just use the conditional rendering, right? So if it's initial, then end to end. So all you have to remember is this syntax of end to end, right? And src equal to this image. Okay, so let's start with the initial. It says start the game, right? So I'm just gonna say, okay, let's play. Then I'm playing the game. Everything's going good. Let's just pause it. I paused it. Let's continue it. Play the game again. I just end this game. This put us back to the initial state where, I can start again, right? So that's why it's a play button. So yeah, I can actually remove this status from here anyway. So this way, I'm just using images, right? See how simple it is? So two things. For the images, I'm using also. So status is basically this. Status has three states: initial state, play, and pause, right? So I define it as initial state, right? Then I have mechanism, those buttons, so I can change it from initial to play, play to pause, pause to end, whatever, right? Uh, so because I have only three state, I can change it. Play handle changes to play, pause changes, and then end changes to initial, right? Okay. Then, uh, uh, I've defined two things for each status. So say if the status, so then you don't have to do anything. You just say, if the status is play, I want to show this image. If the status is pause, I want to show this image. If the status is initial, I want to show this image, right? That's all it is. Status is this, and show this image. Status this, and show this image, right? And then for the buttons, I'm also doing the same thing. If it's an initial, they only want to show the play button. If it's play, I want to show pause and end button. If it's a pause, I want to show continue and end button. That's it. So you discretely think about all the states and then you build it. That's it. And that's the beauty of this, game, right? Let me just copy the whole thing and then put it in the chat. It may not fit in the chat. Let me see. If it doesn't fit, then I'm just gonna put the URL. Nope, it doesn't. Okay, so let me just save this. I'm gonna call it play game. All right, and I'm just gonna share this URL with you guys, so you can try, and I'll also share this in Discord as well. Any questions? So now you're actually thinking in a discrete way, right? And all you're doing is this, right? When you click on something, all it does is changes the state. That's all it does, right? If you see this, a clicks changes the state, and then state itself, then you need to say, if this is the state, I want to show this. If this is the state, I want to show this. That's all. That's all you're doing, right? So now you're thinking in terms of like actual game logic, and you're removing all the other complexity. See how easy this is to build, right? Once you build at least few of these applications, your brain would get handle on this, right? Um, so I want you to practice a lot and then build something like this regularly. Okay? Any questions? Any confusion on this one? If any confusion, ask question now, right? Don't worry about the whether if you don't know any of that, let me know. I can explain again, right? Okay. Yeah, I'll give some homework about this as well. Yeah. I'll probably give homework around this so that, you can modify this example to, do something. So remember, just copy this URL so that you have the example. Okay. Um, yeah, but this is React. As I said, it's in a way it's very simple. You just have to remember the logic and you can build it. You don't have to, connect all of these pieces together like how you need to do in regular JavaScript, right? React provides you all the tools and it does things for you. You don't have to do things, right? I'm not saying that if I click on a play, show this. Instead, I'm saying if I click on a play, change the status to play. And then when status changes, it will render whatever you define. Then on the status side, you're saying if the status is play, show this. If the status is pause, show this. If the status is, so you're not changing the image, you're just changing the status, right? This is the initial status, and then I have 3 different handles that changes the status accordingly. And then once the status changes, it automatically renders. That's what it's called conditional render. If the status is play, show this image. If status pause, show this image, right? And the same thing I'm saying. If status initial, show this, and so on and so forth. If you have multiple things to show, if it's a one button to show, I'm just using the element, right? But if I have multiple things, what happened? Yeah. If I have multiple things, like in this case, I'm just gonna have to wrap it with like empty tag. Otherwise, it's gonna give you an error. So that's all it is. Okay. So you can practice this by, doing this magic. All right. Does it make sense? Okay, cool. Um, yeah, I think this is a building block for building, those application. As I said, all you need to do is if I click on something, some status changes, and then you write logic when this is the status, what happens, when this is the status, what happened, right? So we kind of separate it to issue and build it based on that. So that makes it much simpler, right? Um, it's almost like let's say you have a you have somebody on the other side, right? And you wanna you can give commands to them, right? So let's say if on the other side you don't see the person, uh, you just send a status saying it's initial status. They need to understand if it's an initial status, they're gonna do something. So you're not giving them the command, say, show this start picture, because you could be doing a lot of things, right? So you just send them this command, say, hey, this is pause. They know the meaning of pause. So they'll say, if it's a pause, I'm going to do this, right? So you in a way talk to the application in just a code rather than um, giving the application, do this, do that, right? Application would uh, behave based on the status rather than you giving them order what to do, right? So that's what's happening. Cool. I think we have a few more minutes left. If you guys have any more questions, because I don't want to start anything new. There are, I think, 5 or 6 things we're going to learn. So we learned how to do state. Then the second thing we did learn how to do is events, like on-click event and all that stuff. And then the third thing we learned is conditional rendering, right? Uh, And then there are a few things we're gonna learn. So we're gonna learn like use effect. When you change something, uh, how to change other things based on one change, right? So that's use effect. We also gonna learn how to do if you have things inside an array and you wanna display those things, we're gonna show as well, right? So that's another thing we're gonna do. Um, and then lastly, we're gonna do a couple of other stuff like if you have, let's say, a game where you roll a dice or something, right? You need some sort of randomness. So we're gonna show you how to create random things like random numbers and things like that, right? Because that's very helpful in a lot of games. Like if you play casino games, you need those randomness, right? Um, so when you play casino, you get random numbers, right? And sometimes you have all seven, and then you win the big jackpot. But that's casino doesn't, that machine doesn't decide every time you click what to display, just randomly display stuff, right? So we need some randomness. So that, and that should be enough. I think that's all you need to learn in React, at least at a basic level, so you can build your games, right? So I think it would require two more classes to build those, and then once those skills, um, and then once you build that, then then you're ready to, you know, build your application. Make sure that you start now that you have a clear idea of how things kind of work in this environment, right? Think about now what you want to build, whether it's a tic-tac-toe game or whatever game you're building. Now start thinking about what my state is going to be, you know, start designing things so I can help you build those things right at the end. Okay. Um, cool. If there are no more question, um, I think that's about it. We have 5 more minutes, but I can give you back that time. All right. Sounds good. I'll see you guys next week then. Bye.